Emily, you were about to ask a question, I think.
Yeah, well, I was going to go back to the university, but now I want to stay on this topic. um, Maybe I'll ask it afterwards. So, this is such an important topic, and I think probably there are more questions than we may have answers. And my parents had also benefited from the state of Israel having been developed after being persecuted as Jews in Iraq, and escaped and went to Israel in 1971 and 1973. Um, I think the question that so many people are asking right now is, why is there such a prolific history of anti Semitism? What is it about the Jewish population that that incite this like vehement hate? And that you see it on both sides, on the radical right and the radical left. It's like no matter what we do, it's always going to be criticized. Whether we're challenging white superiority because we're an immigrant, or because we're seen as colonizers by the left and oppressors. It's like no matter what, there's always this level of anti-Semitism, and I see this also in the forensic work that I do in terms of radical ideologies and extremism. That so many of them, when you go to the root of it, is born from anti-Semitism, or there's this link that is driving this hate and resentment that is anti-Semitic. And so I think it's a valid question. Why is the world so critical of Jews? Why is there so much hatred towards Jews? And why are Jews held to a different level of standard that I mean the rhetoric is even permitting what Hamas did and the massacres that they committed on October 7th, saying that they were in the right and they were justified to kill babies and families, none of whom had any weapons and were totally defenseless, um, but because Israel deserved it. And so it just, I question it. We're going to be talking to the rabbi soon next week, and I think maybe there's some spiritual answers, maybe there's some psychological answers, maybe there's historical, contextual, political answers that we can look at this. I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
Okay, well, anti Semitism has many, many roots. Uh, there's no conclusive statement as to why, but it exists. And by the way, much of it is based on false facts. Okay, so the first thing is in the Old Testament, the Jews were chosen. The Israelites actually is what they were not referred to as Jews in the Old, but the Israelites were God's chosen people. Whether that's true or not, that's what's written. That's number one. Number two, number two, there's a rumor, I'm saying it's a rumor, that the Jews murdered Christ. Okay? First of all, Christ was an observant Jew. He was a Reformed Jew. He had a different perception of how the priesthood should work. And so he was a protester in effect, but a Jew. He was murdered by the Romans. Yes, the Jews identified where he was. They were collaborators, but they didn't murder it. But that created what's known as the blood libel. And that blood libel permeates in other manifestations. For example, among certain people, there's a perception that the Passover matzah requires Christian baby blood. It's inconceivable that people would even think of this. My parents were from Poland. 2 million Polish Jews were murdered by the Nazis. But in 1946, a group of brigands in the town of Kielce in Poland ran into the town, committed a pogrom, and killed 52 observant Jews. 2 million dead Jews was not enough for the Poles. So, Emily, you're a psychiatrist, psychologist?
Psychologist. Mm-hmm.
Psychologist. The human mind is extremely complex, okay? And what motivates people to do what they do sometimes is completely irrational. But as far as I can see, the way to combat it is to engage in active education, which is what we're trying to do at Stand With Us and my other communal involvements. We have to educate people. So, does that answer your question? It's not a solution. The root cause of anti Semitism has never been scientifically identified. So, we don't know. We can just speculate.
Let me put out my theory on it. And I'd love to hear what both of you think and whether you think I might be off base on this. First, I think that there are Jewish cultural issues that seem to me that exist wherever Jewish people are. All right, here's a starting point. About the time of Jesus, literally the Jewish religion, the Jewish population had about 100% literacy. They all had to be able to read portions of the Torah. Very highly literate society. Second, their ties to their ancestors are very strong from a Torah and a Talmud standpoint. And those stories, what I find fascinating about them is they're not always about heroes. Like if you listen to the story of Jacob, I mean, Jacob deceived his father, stole his bloodline, stole his mother, and he did all these deceptive things. But the thing about Jacob in the story was he finds a woman that he loves, and he has to work 7 years to be able to get her. And then, of course, his father-in-law tricks him, gives him another woman, and he has to work another 7 years. When he gets done working the 14 years, he's really good at being a shepherd. He knows which sheep are the right sheep. He's very industrious. The stories over and over again talk about prosperity, and prosperity is not seen as a bad thing. It's seen as a positive thing, as a way to have some self-agency. You go around the world, and overwhelmingly in every society, Jews tend to be a more prosperous society. I'm not talking about the individuals, and I'm not trying to do anything like the elders of Zion or anything else. But as a society, they work hard, they're literate, they focus on prosperity, they're willing to invest multi-generationally, not just for one generation, but for many, many generations. Now, you take that into Europe, where in many cases the other societies didn't do as well, and all of a sudden there's a victim mentality. And the victim mentality says, wait a minute, if you're doing better than me, you must have done something that cheated me. You must have done something that stole from me. You must have taken that from me. Otherwise, I would have it, and you wouldn't. Right? And so the answer becomes, it's a power issue. The view of power becomes, hey, I'm the oppressed and you're the oppressor, as opposed to saying, hey, let me have that book that you're reading. I want to see what it is that's in that book that seems to help you guys, regardless of where it is that you go. It becomes an issue that's somehow or another I got ripped off. I think what's going on with young people today is they are effectively, they're coming out of schools and colleges, and oftentimes they're young people, so they feel oppressed, and their version of power is very simple. I'm the oppressed, I'm a victim, and there's an oppressor. And in this particular case, I see a bomb and I see a dead child, and it's immediate. I'm going to apply who I think the oppressor is and who I think the oppressed is. But I think the Jews suffer that over and over again. And I think in Israel today, there's incredible prosperity. I mean, Israel is doing very, very well. I think good news for Israel is, while we're seeing this on college campuses, I think the whole world is fed up with Hezbollah and Hamas. I think even in most of the Arab world, they're fed up with Hezbollah and Hamas. The United States is fed up with it. Europe is fed up with it. They're not getting sympathy from the mainstream people in each society. Now, that doesn't mean we're not giving a lot of exposure to the radical left or the radical right, who seem to be on the other side. But I think that the I think that the anti-Semitism partly comes from a cultural issue that's been very helpful to the Jewish community in helping them prosper from a multi-generational standpoint. I'd love to have both your thoughts on that.
So I'll give you a non-scientific answer, and that is that the human psychology requires scapegoats. There has to be some reason why my life is so bad. It's not because I'm lazy or stupid or whatever. It's because of these other people. And the Jews are an insular minority. They are highly successful, as you point out, as a peoplehood. There's obviously members who are not. We have homeless people too. Um, that we try to take care of, but we coalesce around each other and we create community, and that's something that is largely absent outside today. It's present in part in the African American churches. They create community for their people, but in very few other places is there this profound sense of community. And that therefore creates jealousy, frustration, etc., among the people who see this group continue to progress. That's the best I can give you. My other theory is that anti Semitism is built into the DNA of human beings, but there's no science for that. That's just me spitballing.
Emily, any thoughts on your own?
Yes, yeah. I think, some of the questions that I've always grappled with is, hearing on the other side people's argument that they resent that the Jews have this sense of elitism, that they refer to themselves as the chosen people. And that view is seen as having a superiority complex over others. Um, and I think you're right. I think that we need to find some way to promote some kind of education in really helping people to understand we are survivalists. And it wasn't that long ago. We never had a place to defend. We only had a people to defend. We're fortunate we now have a land to defend that we can call a homeland. But prior to that, it was ingrained. I mean, talking about DNA, it was ingrained in the teachings that you may have to uproot your life at any given moment in time, because historically we are part of a diaspora, and all we have for survival is really our tribe, our family, and this is our legacy. And so it became so much part of our survival that, maybe don't invest in buying property where you live, but invest in educating yourself, because that's transferable. Putting money into things that you can take with you. And I think, just on this show, we have a Jewish doctor and a Jewish lawyer. We fit the stereotypes. But
I'm feeling oppressed all of a sudden.
you're an ally. We share a daughter.
So let me interject some facts here. That again, and I spoke with President Herzog in May of this year, face to face. I was in Israel for a program, and I said to him, Israel has to invest $500 million to $1 billion in a global marketing campaign to tell the real story. Israel does a horrible job of telling the story.
I agree.
Let me share. There are 15 million Jews identified as Jews living on this planet. That is less than 0.2% of the total population of the world. How dominant can we be? 0.2%. Next. Israel has about 8 million people. Beautiful. A Jewish state. There's probably north of 1 billion people who live in Muslim theocracies. Double standard. Why can't there be a Jewish state? There's all these Islamic states. Again, facts. Okay, those are facts. Um, uh, historically, as I said, this area was all part of the Ottoman Empire from about 1200 going forward. So almost for 700 years before Israel was formed. There's no peoplehood. It doesn't exist. Palestine didn't exist. Lebanon didn't exist. Syria didn't exist until the British in 1917 came out, the British and the French in 22 decided to draw lines. And they did a miserable job of it because, and Emily, this is consistent with what you're talking about, in the Muslim world, it is profoundly tribal. Okay. So you have my clan, your clan, Paul's clan. I had dinner with Danny Ayalon, who was the Israeli ambassador to the UN, face to face like this. And I said, why don't you just draw a line? How tough is that? He says, we could do it in 1 minute. He said, but here's the problem. The West Bank is not ruled by the Palestinian Authority. That's nominal. It's ruled by the 380 plus clans that comprise the West Bank. So who do we do a deal with? Okay, it's very clannish, all right, which again, I don't see a problem with that until you ignore that and say we're not like those other people across the river. They're as tribal as we are. It's just they do it differently, and that's okay. It's a big world.